If the Narcissist Goes to Prison, Part 2. What happens where an upper lesser type A or upper lesser type B narcissist finds themselves sent to the state penitentiary, finds themselves going upriver to spend some jail time? Well, being lesser narcissists, without operating a facade, operating in the moment, and sometimes being of low cognitive function, although upper lessers are more likely to be found with an increased level of cognitive function, upper lesser type A and upper lesser type B can often find themselves on the wrong side of the law and indeed getting sent to the Alabama Slammer. What's their fate when they get there? What's the impact upon their fuel matrices? What is the impact upon their ability to assert control? Upper lesser type A and upper lesser type B will, similarly to the middle lesser and lower lesser, be no strangers to criminality, although they tend to be a little more effective at getting away with it. First of all, upper lesser type A tend to exude significant levels of charisma. Cheeky chappies, con men, con artists, fraudsters are often drawn from the upper lesser type A. The type of individual is often remarked as joking as being able to sell snow to the Eskimos and sand to the Arabs. Such an individual can, of course, fall foul because of their sense of entitlement, their lack of accountability, and, of course, their lack of emotional empathy, and the need to assert control results in them engaging in criminal enterprises. Upper lesser type B are the brash, boasting bullies, my way or the highway, and they are the individuals that can lash out, both verbally and increasingly so physically. And although they may come from a successful background, they are uncouth. They behave like a bull in a china shop. For all of their status and money, they are still unpleasant, lowbrow individuals that govern with the iron fist. And again, because of their sense of entitlement, lack of accountability, lack of emotional empathy, it is common for them to engage in behaviour which is criminal and can potentially result thereafter in conviction and imprisonment. Let's deal with the upper lesser type A. What's the impact for this individual? At first, the impact is quite considerable. Basically, you're dealing with somebody that is a hedonist and will be the life and soul of some kind of party, is often very well known in the community, is liked by some, laughed at by others, but often they're the type of individuals you can't help but liking. And for all of the scorn that you might pour upon their lifestyle and the way that they behave, for instance, being the proverbial dog with six sticks, the guy in his 40s who still behaves like he's 18 years old, whooping it's party time, people are still drawn to them. And upper lesser type A can have fairly extensive non-intimate secondary source and intimate partner secondary source fuel matrices. These become lost. And to begin with, when incarcerated, the upper lesser type A will suffer a significant dent in fuel provision. Having gone from a range of friends and family that he regularly entertains, regularly goes out with, regularly has barbecues, parties, pool parties, etc., that falls to the wayside. And the cheeky chappy becomes deflated, muted almost. The absence of this slightly larger fuel matrix impacts upon the upper lesser type A. Moreover, it impacts upon status, because whilst he doesn't operate a facade, he has an idea that is inflated with regard to his level of popularity. He's popular, but he always thinks that he's more popular. He's liked, but he thinks he's extremely well liked. And he's in for a rude awakening, because all of that is wiped out when he finds himself in the prison population. He, in effect, becomes a nobody. Was known for being on the scene on the outside, that vanishes. Known for being on the party circuit on the outside, that vanishes. And therefore this poses a problem for the upper lesser type A with regard to the issue of control. Of course, the advantage that he has is higher energy levels than other lesser narcissists, and the charm that can be relied upon, and his superficiality. he will not be concerned by being brazen. Of all of the narcissists, the upper lesser type A is probably the one which is unfazed by any form of boundary. They really are access all areas. And they have considerable front, considerable brass neck, which means that they will chance their arm. Yes, they may be on the receiving end of a beating because they pushed it too far, but also it tends to cause them to go where others might fear to tread, enabling them to benefit through this high-risk, high-reward strategy that the narcissism adopts. And therefore, without being seen as a grass or an arse licker, they will get prisoners, guards, and prison staff on side quite readily. So when they first enter the prison population, the loss of that larger fuel matrix and the damage to their status will be significant, and there will be a reduced upper lesser type A, muted to an extent, the shine having been reduced from a brilliant glow to something like a nightlight. But this won't last for too long, as the narcissism kicks into action and they start to roll out their charm offensive. Superficial, friendly, always ready with a quip and a joke. Yes, it can backfire when said to the wrong person, but invariably they're the type of individual that is seen as a joker and is an integral part of prison life and is well liked. Always there with a ready anecdote about their behaviour on the outside, the recollections of how they got on, the chicks that they've shagged, and so forth. And this endears them to many people. They also, of course, will continue their conning habits and therefore will be able to obtain favours through residual benefits, and again will enable them to have considerable contact with the outside world. They're likely to have repeated visits from a kaleidoscope of different intimate partner secondary sources alongside the intimate partner primary source, which not only provides them with fuel, but will enable them to gain admiration and kudos with other prisoners. So after a slow start, following the dip in the fuel provision, there is a reasonably quick recovery by the upper lesser type A. And therefore, they create a new fuel matrix relatively quickly and of considerable size. Yes, they will face threats to their control with regard to the behaviour of others within the prison population, but they are far less likely to assert control in an aggressive manner as the lower lesser or the middle lesser, and therefore will become more effective at the assertion of control. They're far less likely to engage in further acts of criminality, thus extending their status. Indeed, they are more likely to engage in good behaviour, keeping people on side, not through facade, but by dirge of their charm and their joking manner, meaning that people are less likely to complain about them and cause problems for them. The upper lesser type A, of course, will maintain contact with the outside world and is not particularly fazed by any loss because over time, if they lose the intimate partner primary source, for instance, they escape them and no longer contact them, they will readily find a replacement within the prison population. And of course, if you have an upper lesser type A somatic, they are very much Gail J or Jail Gave, and therefore they will not bat an eyelid at engaging in sexual behaviours within the prison population for the purposes of the assertion of control and the gaining of fuel, character traits, and residual benefits. So for the upper lesser type A, there will be an initial drop with regard to their ability to control and fuel provision, but they swiftly recover. What about the upper lesser type B? This is the biggest wrecking ball of the lessers. Sometimes intelligent, often coming from a position of wealth and influence, and with a rampant sense of entitlement. This is an individual who operates on the basis of my way or the highway. When they first enter, they will, of course, suffer a dip in fuel as a consequence of the loss of their external fuel matrix. But they don't have particularly large fuel matrices to begin with. This is because, unlike the upper lesser type A, who governs through charisma, the upper lesser type B very much governs through fear, power, and the use of wealth. And it is only really their influence and wealth that often keeps people on side and within their fuel matrix. But most people would rather have nothing to do with them because they are such bullies and are generally unpleasant. People only tolerate them because they have to, because often the narcissist is the paymaster. they will no longer have that ability within the prison population because they will be removed largely from their financial assets, etc. However, the advantage that the upper lesser type B has is that they will translate their external behaviour of bullying and take it into the prison environment with them. These are the type of narcissists that often end up being the daddy on a wing, controlling it, usurping an existing one, and being the go-to man. In such circumstances, they create a new fuel matrix readily. Fearful deference from guards, association and arse-licking from other prisoners, fearful compliance from those prisoners. They're able to extort favours from prison staff, and they will continue to be visited by loyal yet fearful members of the fuel matrix on the outside. Of course, the problem that they have is because they govern in a way of bullying, they will often fall foul of regulation, and there will be instances where they push things too far and will end up possibly being placed into solitary with the consequential impact that will have upon them, possibly pushing them to fuel crisis because they are removed from nearly all opportunities to obtain fuel, and it amounts to a huge threat to the narcissist's control. And if you want to understand more about what happens when there is a fuel crisis, please listen to the video of the same name. The upper lesser type B narcissist remains the bully, governs through fear, expects people to do his or her will, and will create a new fuel matrix in that way. One advantage that they have is that on the outside, people can escape them by physically removing themselves from the bullying upper lesser type B narcissist, and thus they can hemorrhage people fairly quickly from their fuel matrices. When it comes, however, to being inside, the opportunity for individuals to escape the bullying upper lesser type B are far more limited. And therefore that means that even if someone tries to back off and escape the fuel matrix, they're not going to be able to do so. The upper lesser type B will come after them. And thus, by the imposition of fear through their domineering, brutish ways, enables them to continue to obtain fuel. The risk factor, of course, for the upper lesser type B is that once you've killed the king and become the king, somebody else wants to kill that king, and they are at risk of attack, both physical, verbal, being grassed up by envious and fearful prisoners, which results in them having repeated problems. They have to work hard to maintain government and discipline over their fuel matrix, and this will have an impact upon energy levels. They will face repeated threats to that control, but they are well equipped to then respond to it. They are likely, of course, to lose a lot of contact with those on the outside world, save those who fear retribution when the narcissist gets out. But for many people, the fact that the upper lesser type B is behind bars provides them with an opportunity to impose a no-contact regime. Spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, etc. will not want anything to do with the upper lesser type B, having been sick of their bullying ways, and will be breathing a huge sigh of relief now that the individual is behind bars. Even family members are likely to distance themselves from the relevant individual. And therefore, of all of the lessers, it's likely that the upper lesser type B is the one that suffers the most from the loss of the external fuel matrix whilst inside. What they will do, of course, though, is replace that successfully, albeit having to work repeatedly and quite hard to keep it in place. Think of it in terms of, with the upper lesser type A and the upper lesser type B, like an army that's occupied and invaded a country. The upper lesser type A occupies and governs that country largely with the consent of the populace. They see the individual as a benign occupant that eventually they can't help but quite liking, and actually things aren't too bad, are they? Even though they've occupied our country and invaded us. With the upper lesser type B, there's always a resistance, and therefore the occupying army that is the upper lesser type B always has his work cut out, or her work cut out, in terms of the assertion of control over individuals within the prison population that will cause a problem for them. And this will ultimately take its toll upon the upper lesser type B with regard to the energy that has to be dedicated to keeping people in check and the fuel that is provided to them. They also, of course, run the risk of repeated physical assault. This is the second part of If the Narcissist Goes to Prison. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.